Welcome back, class 10. Continuing with your history class, chapter 2, factors leading to the growth of nationalism and foundation of Indian National Congress. Today, we will start with the influence of Western education. The foreign rulers had imposed their language on the Indian for the sake of their own facility. So what happened was, when the Britishers came to rule India, they started slowly and steadily, they started imposing their own language, English language, for their own good, because they didn't understand the language spoken at different parts of India. So to have a common language which they can understand, for that purpose, the Britishers started imposing English language. But the advantages of the knowledge of English were many. But there were a lot of advantages of English language. Western education instilled, that is planted, in the minds of the educated classes the Western ideas of liberty and equality. So with English language came English ideas and English liberal ideas which India was not aware of before. So the educated class were extremely happy because they started to understand and they appreciated the Western ideas of liberty and equality. It also gave them a common language which made it possible for them to understand each other and plan a common program of action. So what happened was, all the educated nationalists from various parts of India, they had different language. There was a language barrier. Why was it a barrier? Because an educated nationalist from the certain part of India did not understand the language of an educated nationalist from the other part of India. So when English came, there was a common language. Pan-India, there was a common language. All the nationalists, they started to understand each other so that they can have a common program, common goal, and a common plan to uproot the Britishers, or rather, they have a common program of action. Nationalists in India drew inspiration from the works of Locke, L-O-C-K-E, J.S. Mill, Ruskin, and Voltaire. They were also influenced by the French Revolution, and the battle cry of the French revolutionaries were liberty, equality, and fraternity. Many young men, many young Indians went to England to receive education or for other purposes. Stay in England gave them an intimate knowledge and the working of free institutions, the parliament, and democratic elections. So with this English language, with this Western education, it broadened the mind of the Indians. So they intimately knew how the European countries or the English people worked. They understood their democratic elections. They understood how the English Parliament worked and things like that. Now, role of press and Indian literature, very commonly asked in your exam. The press and literature played a big role in carrying nationalists' ideas to the people. So when press came, when people started writing, the nationalist ideas spread all over India. The press. Raja Ram Mohan Roy was the founder of the nationalist journals in India. His Sangbad Kaumudi in Bengali was published in 1821. Remember the name. It had a distinct nationalist character. So it was a very nationalist newspaper or a journal. There had been a strict censorship on the publication of papers and journals. Obviously, the Britishers were very strict of what type of journals or publications Indians published, because if it had any anti-British writing, the Britishers obviously did not allow. Ram Mohan Roy started legal battle against the press regulations. So what did Raja Ram Mohan Roy do? He started waging a war against the press regulations. Dadabhai Naoroji edited Rast Goftar in Gujarati, and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar started Som Prakash in Bengali in 1858. These names and who started these publications are important. In the second half of the 19th century, that was after 1850, many English dailies came into being. Many English daily newspapers also started to be published. Some of these continued to be popular newspapers even today, such as the Times of India, which you can find today also. It was started in 1861, the Pioneer in 1865. You'll find the Statesman today also. It started in 1875. These papers, by and large, supported the policies of the government of India. Yet they kept people informed of rapid political developments in the country. So what did these English papers do? These English papers did then and is still now doing. They supported the policies of the government of India, and parallelly they also informed the people of India the political developments which was happening in the country. The nationalist press also progressed during the period. The Amrit Bazar Patrika began as an Anglo-Indian weekly. Later, it was converted into English daily. The Tribune started in Lahore in 1877, and the Hindu started in Madras. Great was the influence of these papers in fostering patriotism, nurturing patriotism inside and ideas of liberty and justice in our country. So, through these publications and through these newspapers, Indians started to grow and nurture the feeling of patriotism and ideas of liberty and justice in their minds. Through his writings in the Kesari and Maratha, Tilak also spread the gospel of freedom and natural rights. The people were asked to unite and work for national welfare. Then comes national literature. This period further witnessed the production of outstanding works like Brotendu Harishchandra's play Bharat Durdasha and Bankim Chandra Chatterjee's Anandamot, which is rightly being called the Bible of the modern Bengali patriotism. Our national song Vande Mataram was taken from this book. The first great occasion when it was sung was in 1896, session of the Indian National Congress. Nationalists drew great inspiration from this song. Now comes economic exploitation. Economic exploitation. The British conquest had a ruinous impact, that means devastating impact, which ruined the Indian economy. So the British conquest had a ruinous impact on Indian economy. Number one, peasants' sufferings. Peasants means farmers' sufferings. Under the zamindari system, the peasants were left absolutely at the mercy of the landlord. So under the zamindari system, the peasants were under the mercy of the landlord, who could drive them off their land at any time. The landlords could kick the peasants out of their land or field at any time. The royautoire system, which was the individual peasant proprietorship, also was no less harsh than the zamindari system. The Indian peasants had to sell their produce at a cheap price in order to satisfy the greed of the moneylenders, the zamindars, and the government officials. So, what did the Indian peasants had to do? The Indian peasants had to sell off their products at cheap prices to satisfy the greed of the moneylenders, zamindars, and the government officials. There was a continuous increase in indebtedness. Indebtedness means the peasants used to borrow money, but they were not able to repay them. So in Pune and Ahmednagar districts of Maharashtra were full-fledged agrarian revolt in 1875. Agrarian revolt means revolt by the farmers. The army was called to quell, means to squash the disturbance. Big British agencies geared production in India to the needs of the world market. Export cash crops like indigo, opium, jute, and tea became serious rivals of food crops. So, when the Britishers found that opium, indigo, jute, and tea are profitable cash crops, they started discouraging the farmers to produce food crops like wheat, rice, wheat, barley, things like that. So, in the second half of the 19th century, that was after 1850, a series of famines occurred in many parts of India, as in UP, Bihar, Bengal, Orissa, and which took a toll of lakhs of lives. So, lakhs of people died. Second economic exploitation was that handicrafts stagnated. Stagnation means stopping, still. The British rule had a very damaging effect on Indian handicrafts. Heavy duties were imposed on goods imported into England. Imported means imported into England from India. So the goods which went to England from India. Further, British goods were forced upon India since she was at the mercy of her foreign masters. So raw materials were taken from India and finished products were dumped in India. The policy of free trade was responsible for the destruction of the crafts and trades. Sir William Hunter remarked that there remain 40 millions of Indians who go through life of insufficient food. So 40 million Indians every day did not have proper food. Third point was dissatisfied educated youths. Now, the educated young men in India were becoming increasingly dissatisfied with the government because the better paid jobs were kept out of their reach. Only the Britishers got the better paid jobs. Surendranath Banerjee, an ICS official, was dismissed from the service on superficial grounds, very petty issues. So, the man who was thus denied an opportunity to serve the British government was destined to be the leader of the national movement in India. Obviously, since Surendranath Banerjee, an ICS official, was dismissed from the service, so he became a nationalist leader. Number 4 point was government ignored people's welfare. Government started to ignore the welfare of the people. Burden of taxes were constantly on the increase, but the government did very little to promote the welfare of the people. Huge expenditure was incurred on army and police force to sustain the British imperial interest. The Second Afghan War, the Burmese War, and other military operations demanded a sharp increase in the military budget. It increased from 200 million to 300 million rupee. So you can see how insufficient attention was paid to rise the living standard of the people. Now comes repressive colonial policies, repressive colonial policies. Englishmen were proud of their race. Just a minute. Okay. Englishmen were proud of their race and treated Indians only with contempt. Contempt means disregard. There were exclusive clubs and railway coaches for Europeans where the entry of Indians was forbidden. Indians were forbidden to enter exclusive clubs and railway coaches in Europe. At the district headquarters, there were exclusive residential areas, popularly known as civil lines, where only Europeans could live. So you can understand. Lord Lytton was the Viceroy of India from 1876 to 1880. His repressive policies and deeds intensified discontentment, means dissatisfaction in the country. Number one was the age for the civil service examination. In 1877, the minimum age for the civil service examination was reduced from 21 to 19. This was a very calculated move because 19 years old English people are, they are much more educated than in comparison to a 19-year-old Indian. So chances are in the civil service examination, when the age was reduced from 21 to 19, chances are the Britishers will get more opportunity, or they will get, they had a better chance to pass this civil service examination in comparison to the Indians. So this was a calculated move to ruin the prospects of Indian candidates for the civil service examination. The Imperial Darbar in Delhi in 1877 added insult to the injury. Why? For it was held at a time when millions of South Indians were affected from terrible famine. Vernacular papers reacted sharply against this callous and irresponsible act. Third point is the press regulations. The government tried to silence opposition by enacting the Vernacular Press Act and the Arms Act of 1878. The Vernacular Press Act crushed the freedom of the vernacular papers. The act required the editors to publish nothing that would excite dissatisfaction against the government. Many editors who opposed the act were sentenced to jail. So, the Britishers introduced the Vernacular Press Act and the Arms Act. Under the Vernacular Papers Act, vernacular means local language paper. Any anti-British writing was censored, the local papers were not allowed to print anything which went against the British rule. The act required editors to publish nothing that would go against or will cause dissatisfaction against the government. Many editors opposed the act were sentenced to jail. Now comes the Indian Arms Act. The Indian Arms Act made it a criminal offense for Indians to keep or bear arms without license, but it was not the same for the Britishers. Britishers could keep arms. Now comes the Ilbert Bill controversy. What was Ilbert Bill controversy? Lord Ripon, who succeeded Lytton, tried to reduce some grievances of the Indians. So what did Lord Ripon do? Lord Ripon tried to reduce some dissatisfaction of the Indians. But his attempts were marred, means were squashed by the controversy of the Ilbert Bill. At that time, no Europeans could be tried for a criminal offense except by European judge or magistrate. If there was, at that time what happened was, if any European criminals or if anyone European were put to trial, only a European judge or magistrate can, uh, you know, uh, I mean, any European person was put to trial. The judge will always be an European, or a judge or magistrate will always be an European. So an European judge or magistrate will give ruling to the European people. Accordingly, so Lord Ripon tried to do away with the absurdity. Lord Ripon thought it was absurd. A judge is a judge. So accordingly, a bill was introduced in 1883 by Ilbert. So the law members of the Governor General Council, Executive Council, the Anglo-Indian community carried on a wild agitation against this measure because they thought so it was bad, because they thought that an English person, an English criminal will be tried by an English judge. The government ultimately withdrew the bill and negotiated a compromise. So what was the compromise? As a result, the Indian district magistrates and judges were empowered to try European offenders on the condition that the accused were to have benefit of a trial by jury, a body of people who decide whether the accused is guilty or not. Half the members of the jury would be Europeans or Americans. So what happened was, there was a negotiation. What was the negotiation? The negotiation was, okay, Indian district magistrate and judges are empowered to try or to give rule against or for an European offender. So when an European offender will come in front of a judge or a magistrate, that judge and magistrate can be an Indian. But the European offender will have a benefit of trial by a jury. That means that European offender can have a group of people, a jury board, who will decide whether the accused, who is a European, is guilty or not. But the fun thing over here is, half the members of the jury were to be European or American. So if the half the member of the juries are European and American, so the European or American offender, they will give any sentence which will go for that offender. You understand what I am saying? If the jury is from my own country, if the jury members are from my own caste, from my own country, the jury member will give the ruling which will go for me. They will not accuse me. 90% chances they will not accuse me. So all these above measures demonstrated that the British considered themselves to be racially superior to Indians. So this was the repressive colonial policies by the Britishers. Okay. So that is all for today. In the next class, we'll start off with precursors or forerunners of the Indian National Congress, and then we'll study how the Indian National Congress was founded. That is all for today. Thank you.